Oklahoma is the land of second, third, and last chances. Who were the people that made it so? We'll trace the golden threads they've woven through Oklahoma history. The Red River Institute, JohnJDwyer.com, and our signature sponsor, Atwoods, present Oklahoma Gold. While John J. Dwyer is completing the Oklahomans Volume 2, he is sharing his microphone with Red River Institute board member and award-winning author, broadcaster, and avocational historian Wade Burleson. I'm Gwen Falconer-Lippert. We'll dig for the golden nuggets of Oklahoma history here now on Oklahoma Gold, the Burleson Chapters. The first secret mission of the Civil War happened in Oklahoma? Wade Burleson, what is this story?
Well, it's my favorite of all the stories that I tell. And I realize that in a generation when many people don't even know what happened 2 years ago, to identify the years of the Civil War is hard for some, but the time period we're talking about is 1861 to 1865. Those are the 4 years of the Civil War. Those are also the years that President Abraham Lincoln was the President of the United States. He's called the War President because his tenure included those 4 years. The war began on April the 12th, 1861, when Fort Sumter was fired on by the Confederates in the South. Now, what's interesting, Gwen, is Abraham Lincoln refused to call it a war when it started. He called it an insurrection. And if you're thinking, January 6th of 2021, an insurrection occurred in Washington, D.C., well, that's what Lincoln wanted to call it, because that's not a war. It's just people who are disgruntled. However, very soon it became obvious that this was going to turn into an attack of the South onto the capital of the United States. Back then it was just called Washington. There was no D.C. And Abraham Lincoln realized, now get this is what most people don't understand, that to protect the capital, he had to get the finest officers, artillerymen, and cavalrymen in the United States Army. And they were a long way away from Washington. In 1861, April of 1861, they were all located in what we call Oklahoma. They had been sent here in order to prevent the civilized Indians, the 5 civilized tribes, from being attacked by what the Army called the uncivilized Indians, the Indians to the west, who, I'm from Enid, and our mascot is called the Enid Plainsmen. And the Enid Plainsmen were like Kiowa, Apache, Cheyenne. They were the greatest horsemen in the history of the world. But when the government forced the civilized Indians from Tennessee, North Carolina, all the states, Florida, to the east, to Oklahoma, when those civilized Indians got here, the Choctaw, the Seminole, the Cherokee, and so on.
And Chickasaw.
And Chickasaw, of course. They were being attacked by the uncivilized horsemen. And so the government sent the finest troops to Oklahoma to protect the civilized Indians from the uncivilized Indians.
And so the nations were fighting among themselves. I don't think I knew this, but it makes perfect sense.
Of course it does. Well, now we get to the place where Washington needs these troops from Oklahoma to protect the capital from the insurrection of the South. So they send a undercover agent, a gentleman by the name of William Averill. He was with the 1st United States Cavalry. He had been wounded in the Indian Wars in New Mexico. And when the Civil War started on April the 12th, 1861, Abraham Lincoln and the United States General-in-Chief, Winfield Old Fuss and Feather Scott, sent Averill to Indian Territory with a handwritten note evacuating the troops, the United States troops in Oklahoma, north to Fort Leavenworth, and then back to Washington to protect the capital. Well, William Averill, he's the only general on both sides of the Civil War that an official biography has never been written about. He is one of the most courageous, bravest men you'll ever read about, but you can't find much material to read. He dresses as a Confederate, and he makes his way by train as far west as he can go. Then he takes a stagecoach south to the entrance into Indian Territory, Fort Smith, and then while he's in Fort Smith, he's identified as a Union soldier by the Confederates who had taken over Fort Smith, and the chase is on. And in a 5-day chase, the Confederate troops chase Lieutenant William Averill through Oklahoma to Fort Arbuckle. If you don't know where Fort Arbuckle is, the Arbuckle Mountains, right off of I-35, Davis, Oklahoma, you go 7 miles west. The old Fort Arbuckle is located there. That's where Averill was going. That's where the troops were stationed. He almost dies 3 times as the Confederates chase him across Oklahoma. Finally, when he gets to Fort Arbuckle, he falls off of his horse, and the commander at Fort Arbuckle had fought with Averill in New Mexico. And he recognizes him, and he says, "Averill, is that you? My God, what are you doing here?" And Averill looks at him and he says, "I've been sent by the president. You need to evacuate north to come back to the capital to protect Washington from the insurrection." Well, here's the thing, Gwen. Those troops at Fort Arbuckle, they didn't know how to move north. They didn't know where to go. They came into Oklahoma, into Indian Territory, from the gateway, Fort Smith. So they had to find someone who knew his way around northern Indian Territory. And they found an Indian named Black Beaver. And Black Beaver was asked by the troops to guide them north. Now, when we come back, I'll tell you how he got 1,000 United States troops out of Indian Territory to Fort Leavenworth. And the path that he took them on, you can follow it today, Highway 81. And every little stop on Highway 81 going north, Dover, Hennessy, Enid, there are natural springs. And Black Beaver knew where to stop to let the horses get water, to replenish canteens, and he moved north and got them out successfully to Fort Leavenworth. And when we come back, I'll tell you what happened to Black Beaver, because in my mind, he is one of the heroes of the United States, along with William Averill, and the story is worth knowing and remembering.
Now, what happened to William Averill?
When we come back, William Averill ended up becoming a general and a millionaire because he invented American asphalt. And I'm looking out a 50-pin place here in Oklahoma City. American asphalt is the parking lot. He's the inventor of it.
Stitching the past to the present, this is Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history by telling their stories. Wade Burleson, the first secret mission of the Civil War. So was the first secret mission with William Averill, or was it with Black Beaver?
That's an excellent question. It's with William Averill of the United States 1st Cavalry. And somebody says, well, if it's secret, how do you know about it? Well, in the official records, it's called the OR of the Civil War. This is listed there in the documents. And Averill went on his journey to Indian Territory just 3 days after the bombing on Fort Sumter, with orders to evacuate the finest troops from Indian Territory. Now, he gets here, and he has to lead the troops north, but he doesn't know how. Nobody knows where to go, so they recruit Black Beaver. Now, Black Beaver had fought with the United States against Mexico 46, 47, and 48. He had also been the guide for James Audubon, the Audubon Society, the Pacific Coast. He'd been to the Pacific 7 times, and he knew the route north. Now, it was very dangerous to go north because the Comanche, the Apache, the Kiowa, they would scalp you, and so on. So the troops really didn't want to go that route, but it was the fastest way to get to Fort Leavenworth. Rather than going back to the east, the Confederates had already overtaken Little Rock and Fort Smith, and they were moving up from the south in Texas. They had to get to Kansas, to Fort Leavenworth, and then back to Washington. So Black Beaver guided them. Black Beaver and William Averill were at the head. 1,000 officers and troops making their way north. They stop all along the way. Dover, what we call Dover today, Hennessy, Enid, at what we call Government Springs, because there were natural springs. Back then, the Indians called it Medicine Springs, and they camped and replenished their canteens. Eventually made it to Fort Leavenworth, and of these 1,000 troops, 7 of them went on to become generals for the Union Army, including William Averill. 2 of them won the Congressional Medal of Honor. They were leaders in the battles of Gettysburg, Chancellorsville. These were men who were stationed in Oklahoma in the late 1850s and 1860s, and in the first secret mission of the Civil War, eventually got out. Now, here, Gwen, is the rest of the story. You asked me what happened to Averill, and I told you he went on to become a millionaire, and he invented American asphalt. By the way, his first project after the war, when the war was over in 1865, he got a contract with the city of New York, and Fifth Avenue was the first road in America paved with American asphalt, and he paved Fifth Avenue. But what happened to Black Beaver? Well, Black Beaver had a friend by the name of Jesse Chisholm. And Jesse Chisholm came with Black Beaver to Kansas during the war, because when the Confederates found out that Black Beaver had guided the troops north, they burned his farm, kidnapped his wife and children, put a bounty on his head, and for 4 years Black Beaver could not come back to Indian Territory. So Jesse Chisholm went up to Wichita to live with him. When the war was over, Jesse Chisholm says, how do I get back to my trading station in what we would call Oklahoma City? Back then, of course, the land run hadn't yet happened. So Black Beaver responds, follow the trail I blazed with the Union troops 4 years ago. Jesse Chisholm followed that trail. And of course, most people know the story that the cattle drives that began from Texas that moved north to Kansas to the railheads, and then the cattle were shipped back to New York, followed what is called the Chisholm Trail. The problem is, it's really Black Beaver's trail, and to this day, the Delaware Indians, and Black Beaver was a Delaware, refuse to call Highway 81 and that national trail the Chisholm Trail. They call it Black Beaver's Trail. Now, the reason I'm very fond of Black Beaver is after the war, he did come back. He became a Baptist preacher. And he lived out the last 20 years of his life preaching the good news of Jesus Christ to the people of Oklahoma. And now if you fast forward, in 1975, we were preparing for the bicentennial of the United States. The United States government wished to honor forgotten heroes. In an incredible ceremony, the United States government, with full military honors, exhumed the body of Black Beaver from his family plot. There was a front page article on this in the Daily Oklahoman with pictures, and unfortunately, they cannot find the original pictures.
So what is the golden nugget?
Well, Gwen, in my mind, the golden nugget is quite moving, and it revolves around the exhumation of Black Beaver's body. The body of Black Beaver was exhumed, and with full military honors, was relocated to Fort Sill, where if you go today to Fort Sill, the biggest monument in the graveyard is to Black Beaver, because Black Beaver, this Delaware Indian that nobody's ever heard of, is, in my mind, the one person that enabled the United States of America, the Union, to defeat the Confederacy by getting the best troops out of Indian Territory back to Washington to protect the capital. An incredible story of history.
What a golden nugget. And that's Oklahoma Gold.